welcome to No Question About That. We're asking the question today, is Amorim the worst Manchester United manager ever? I'm Ed with Wayne Barton, the man to give us the historical context, Omar Barada's favourite author. You've been widely referenced today, I'd say, Omar, quoting Football Talk by Matt Busby, your tome. I think the tome is like 500 pages. I think that's a tome. Yeah. So we're going to answer that question. We'll look into some historical Manchester United managers, both modern and almost ancient, and try and put some of this in context. So, Ruben Amorim, hired on, the 1st of November, started on the 11th of November, 2024, sacked on the 5th of January, 63 games, 24 wins, 18 draws, 21 losses, a 38.1% win rate, to put it in context, which is quite a lot lower than other managers of recent times. So, to answer the question, is he the worst Manchester United manager ever?
It's a good question. I knew it would come up, particularly in the context of him saying it was the worst Manchester United team of all time.
He said that against Brighton last season, right?
Yeah, so early into his reign, which gives you an indication of what he thought he was inheriting as well. But I think he was taking some of the slack himself at the time. And we discussed it on the podcast. Like, it was such a big statement to make. But he referenced it again a few weeks later. And I think it was the kind of well you can only go to once without seeing. You need some kind of reaction. I mean, we never got it, and he never did. And he made these kind of sweeping big statements. And I think the idea was to set the foundation for some kind of standards, but it just never turned out that way. So, I mean, the question is he the worst manager of all time? I think, and I don't like doing that we're doing it for the purposes of our own conversation, not for the purpose of throwing a manager under the bus, because I think it's a little bit unfair to do that. But you can't get away from the fact that there's not a lot of supporting evidence to champion what he did as manager of United. We looked back at Erik ten Hag's reign, you and I, sometimes conflicting with the way that we saw it. But the idea was, the last few months, it was like, how much credit does he have in the bank? How much of it is run out? And it's a phrase that we've revisited a few times with Amorim. And the truth is, he had none. And the credit that he got was on individual results and performances, and they were very few and far between. So, and really, all we've got is the evidence of 2 or 3 games in that entire time. One of those results was against Lyon, and I would say that was the antithesis of what he was trying to do.
Yeah,
I mentioned it on the last podcast that I was on when I was referencing the different managers and their high points post Sir Alex. And if you can say that is contrary to their philosophy, then that's a worrying start to begin with.
Right. I mean, it's an amazing night, amazing result, just utter chaos and those little details that you can almost throw away. Same with the Liverpool result as well, really. A win at Anfield, obviously amazing, but done through launching the ball long and defending resolutely. A specific thing. There's just almost nothing in his 63 games that you can point to as a complete performance, which is shocking, really, because, even Ralph probably had some complete performances in there. I'm struggling to remember one. Actually, maybe he didn't.
But and also, just to round off the point, not to really hammer the nail in the coffin for Amorim here, but the City win was achieved with 2 late goals. It wasn't.
Yeah.
But the one thing I would say about Amorim, and I did bang this drum repeatedly throughout, is that he did set up his team to win in football matches. Even if we were playing with 5 in defence, even if we had to play with 6 sometimes, I don't think that part of it was by design. I think he always tried to put our style of play on the opponent. So I will give him his credit for that. I just don't think it was the most pragmatic of offensive ways. And there's not a lot of positive evidence. So I went back in the annals of United history, because I think the easy answer for this question is he the worst post-war manager? And I think the answer is yes. I think if you look at Dave Sexton and Frank O'Farrell, or any post-Ferguson manager, even David Moyes, I think that they were, and maybe this might be too much credit given to Moyes, considering he was inheriting a better side. I just think that there were higher moments in all of those, better moments of quality, even if like under Moyes, they were against what the manager was trying to do. There were still higher moments of quality in there because of the players that he inherited. And we've just not seen any of that.
None at all. Moyes had a 52% win rate, but as you said, he inherited the champions and was a bit of a rabbit in the headlights. But maybe that was some of our framing of Moyes is also to do with his personality. You know, he didn't have the personality the charisma, the riz to impose himself on the club. He felt like a deer in the headlights very, very early. Amorim didn't, right? He had this big, stubborn personality. He was charming. He walked into the club. He had this BDE. He was just like, I'm the man. And then the results were the absolute counter to that. And he doubled down on it when it was all going badly. And that feels like a character flaw to me, that he couldn't look inside and go, hey, things are going badly wrong here. I should change something, until it was too late, basically, until he was told.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that, but I think a lot of that is perception, because the way that a manager's portrayed, because if you look at the actual content of the statements and the way that they were delivered, Moyes is, like, you're quite right, the rabbit in the headlights stuff. I think he said something like, we'll try and make it difficult for Newcastle. We aspire to be like we aspire to be like Manchester City after they'd just beaten us 3-0 or something like that. And they're not that much different to, you know, we're the worst United team of all time, and the way that but you know, it's just the way that he was more charismatic in the way that he came across. And United were at a lower ebb, so it was kind of like at that moment we were ready to accept the difficult truths, and we actually wanted it. We wanted a manager to speak the way that he did early on. It was just like there was no actual substance that came from that. But so I went back further because I thought post Ferguson, everyone's got their own opinion on. We've all lived it, we've all seen it, and I wanted to go way, way back pre-war to provide the numbers, because everyone can look at them on Wikipedia and they can look at Amorim 38.1%, and the other ones around him, some a little bit lower, a little bit higher. So you've got Jack Robson, 29.5%.
When was Jack Robson?
1940, it's like just before the First World War and just after the war. John Chapman, 38.9%. He succeeded Robson. Clarence Hilditch, 30%, which I'll get onto in a moment because it seems quite low. His is quite low. And Herbert Bamlett, 31.15%. My take on this is that Amorim, I'll say ahead of time, Amorim, I'm sorry to say, I think he's the worst. This is taking everything into consideration. So you're going
to have to write a book on this now. Now you've started it, you're going to have to go down this train of, like, you know, who's the worst? No, it's not your style. It's not your style, I know, but
but I mean, in this lens, this is the way that we've got to discuss it, and it is difficult because, I mean, one of the big things I've talked about in recent years is this, and we haven't had a lot of it to talk about with United, but I think more to do with the Messi and Ronaldo conversation, is that we frame greatness in such a different kind of way these days. Is that first is first and second can be so good, but the way that people portray it is miles away from it, and they denigrate it so quickly, and they're quick to rubbish it and everything like that. And I think that if you do that, you do a massive disservice to the competition at the first. They're great for a reason. They've got to be great because the competition's great. Conversely, if they're rubbish, they're in rubbish company, and we've got to sort of, you know, by presence of the fact that we've had the greatest moments that you can imagine in terms of storytelling and the history that we've had, we've also had these depths of despair, which we're going to come to. And we all know from which we were rescued in 1902 or 1931. And there's a big chunk of that period here that I'll be talking about. So, and I'll try and get through them as briefly as I can, Ed, because I know you like the storytelling, but I don't want to bore the listeners too much. So Jack Robson was the first on the list. He was manager. He presided over the period where people will be familiar with the story if you know United's history, the Good Friday game in 1915, the match-fixing game with United and Liverpool. Well, he was the first person to be named manager of Manchester United. He was the first. Before that, there were secretaries. He was hired as the first man to be given that role as manager. This was right after Ernest Magnell had left to go back to Manchester City. John Henry Davies, as backing of the club, had kind of drifted away. He was still there. He was still the major benefactor. Whenever the club needed anything, he still bankrolled it. But he pulled back in a way that the golden era that had brought all those great players like Billy Meredith and then financed to move to Old Trafford. All of that was on the back burner now, and United had to sort of make do with what they've got. And that was Robson's role. He was in there as a parsimonious. He was very spendthrift, and that was why he was brought in for. Now, this was just before the war. The war came, robbed all these players of their careers, the majority of it. And after the war, he had this philosophy of players before points, which was find good young talent.
Right.
This is even way before. This is 10 years before the academy even. So he brought in a lot of good young players, and it was successful. He brought in players like Joe Spence, who at the time went on to be the club's record appearance holder. Clarence Silditch, who I'll come on to in a minute. And Robson was popular. He was doing a decent job, but he had to step down due to ill health. In fact, he loved United so much that he had an house on Warwick Road. He died 2 months after he had to step down. So when fans went to pay their respects, they were walking past his house to pay their respects. That's how much he was connected to United. So he was succeeded by a guy called John Chapman. Originally, the idea was that Robson would be assistant manager, but it quickly became clear that he wouldn't be able to. He wasn't well enough to take those duties. Chapman had a similar prudent background at Airdrie, and he was the first one to really come down with superstition. He decided that United were going to play in a new strip that was just like Airdrie's, which was United. Again, people who know United's history will know that they played the 1909 final in a white shirt with a red chevron.
Yeah.
Well, they changed to that kit full time. It was Airdrie's colours, and they changed to that. Yeah. But Chapman had a terrible start. He lost.
I knew this was the kit at that time because I'd seen it. I didn't know the story behind it exactly. The fact there was Airdrie colours. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they weren't lucky. By the way, he lost 18 matches from his first 27. So I think we've had it rough.
Can you imagine if social media was around in those days? The Manchester Evening News with its hot take 3 days after the game or whatever it was. Yeah.
Well, they would have loved the story that ended with Chapman's reign, really. So he sort of kept United plodding along. They weren't great or anything like that, but they were plodding along. But he lost his job due to suspension. A board member submitted a complaint about a missed alleged payment or something to a player, and nobody was quite sure where it come from because the books weren't filed for one season. And this board member apparently got sick of it and filed an official complaint in. So they had a board meeting where it got resolved. Chapman agreed to having made this payment and made the books square. However, the complaint was already in, and he went to the FA, and the FA levied a suspension against Chapman, so he had to step down. The idea was that he would return at the end of the season. In all the history books, there's really sort of shrouded mystery over this. Like, nobody knows exactly what that payment was for, or why he left, or why he was suspended, apart from improper conduct. Apart from, I think it was Alf Clarke, or I think it might have been Percy Young, one of the journalists who wrote one of the early histories of United, said that they knew full well the matter of why this guy was suspended. But he sort of took it to his grave, basically, didn't talk about it. So Chapman left. He actually, at the end of the season, I think he left football completely and managed a race course after that. So
Wikipedia tells me he tried to become manager of Leeds and was unsuccessful.
Yeah, towards the end of that season. And I think that was covered by the terms of the suspension at the time.
Right.
There's something to do with that. So in this period, we had a lot of supporter unrest. Davies pulling his money back, and there was a guy called George Greenough who, there was talk of him being appointed to the board at one point. Charlie Roberts, who was the great captain in the 1900s, the first title-winning side, they were talking about lobbying to put him on as a sort of, I guess, a figurehead or a chairman or something like that. That didn't work out, and eventually Herbert Bamlett came in towards the end of the 1920s, who's referenced as possibly the worst, other than Ruben Amorim, and he probably was. Now, this is a story. Herbert Bamlett is a story. So he'd been a referee, right? He refereed United in the 1909 FA Cup run. They played at Burnley, and the game was snowed off. The Burnley players were winning. I think Burnley were winning. It was snowing. They didn't think it was bad enough to get called off. United players. There's an urban legend that Charlie Roberts, who was the captain, went and took the whistle off the referee and blew to abandon the game. So at the time, like everyone was like, "Oh, Bamlett's biased towards United." He retired, became a football manager. He was at Middlesbrough, but had done really badly at Middlesbrough. In fact, they went down with the record lowest total. They were so bad, but United's needs were dire. They brought him in, and he kept United up for a couple of seasons, but they were regressing badly. He was reverting to superstitions as well. I think they changed the colours back at this point, but he was doing things like taking his daughter's doll into the dressing room and stuff, like classic tales of the day. And they were working; these little things were working, but towards the end of the season where he lost his job, basically what had happened is his contract was up for renewal, and the club knew that they were going down, and they didn't renew the contract, so he wasn't sacked. He left. He sort of like his departing speech to the players before he left. We played Sunderland. He said, like, "Look, whatever you do, I know I'm going, but please beat my record with Middlesbrough. Please don't let me have that record." So they beat Sunderland, and everyone thought, they're going to at least beat that record. They're not going to be the worst team of all time. And on the last day, so he wasn't in charge anymore. On the last day of the season, the club still needed to win at Middlesbrough. Oh no, they were at home to Middlesbrough, and they needed 2 points to make sure that they went above that record. So bearing in mind, you got United Middlesbrough on the last day. United are already down to Division 2. They need to win to make sure that Bamlett doesn't beat his own record, even though he's no longer manager of either club. And United, when they went 3-1 down, they came back to go 4-3 up. So you think they're about to do it, but they finished 4-4. And they finished the season on 22 points, meaning that he actually shares his
own record.
Yeah.
Does that mean that United are now going to hire either Paul Jewell or Billy Davies, who have the record with Derby, until Wolves beat it this season? Although now we've given them confidence, maybe they won't.
Maybe, but I mean, those are the ones where you look at. That's the context of the worst ever managers in United history, and the reason why I'm then looking at Amorim, which you're saying is 7% higher, his win percentage is 7% higher than Bamlett's. This was a period like Bamlett oversaw a period where the club were going bankrupt again.
Yeah,
James Gibson came in. Davies had pulled back all of his money, and there was so much turmoil going on. I know that United are in a mess. They're in a dire mess, and we all knew it was going to be a struggle. But Amorim's still being able to spend £200 million, and he could have spent on 3 players like he did, or he could have bought in 5 players for £40 million, and it would have still been a damn sight better off than what they were destitute. They couldn't afford to pay the players in the 30s. And I think all things considered, when you look at where United, and also we've talked about this many times, that the absolute state of the league at the moment, where United could have comfortably been in the top 4 even before. I don't even put these recent results since we've last talked. So we joked about Wolves and we joked about Leeds. I don't put them that much down to Amorim. I think the squad's in a mess at the moment. So I think he got through those the best that he could. But I think overall, looking at what he inherited, the state of the league, the complete lack of anything that we can say is redeeming. The only thing, because we've just looked at all the results and we picked some off and we said there's reasons for why that's not impressive. The only thing left is to say that Ahmad's played well at right wing back. And it's not enough.
It's not enough. In fact, he was good under Ten Hag as well, Ahmad. So eventually. The interesting thing when you try and put it in this kind of historical context is there's a kind of modern context as well, which is United finished 15th last season and he's been fired at 6th place. It was probably one of the highest places ever that a Manchester United manager has been fired. Moyes was 7th when Moyes was fired, for example, if he's the next worst in post-Ferguson history. But that kind of context I always thought was a little bit false, right? Why were United 15th? Because we couldn't string any wins together at all at the back end of last season. It was just unbelievably, shockingly bad. Maybe in the wash of the next few weeks, we'll work out why that happened. Why was everyone really on board with United losing just so many games? last season. So the very, very low point, the end of last season, was of Ruben's and the club's own making. And we've improved from there. And United are on for a 60-point season, which last season I think would have got you 8th. And when Ten Hag finished 8th, it was 60 points, right? So, and that gives you context of either... I'm never quite sure. I know you've said a few times on the pod the standard of the league isn't great. It's either that or it's hyper competitive because the clubs are all doing pretty well in European competition if that's the benchmark. But it's just very, very competitive. A lot of flawed teams with about the same kind of quality between 4th and 10th. United are currently 4 points off 14th. And a couple of points off the Champions League spaces. And so that gives you some kind of context. You could kind of make an argument to go, well, it's getting better, isn't it? But in the context of modern Manchester United, it's not good enough. Of course, this is a club that nearly went bust twice, that had to be rescued and saved. The whole team died. If you look at Jimmy Murphy's record, it's not great. He had to play however many games it was that season with no players and so on. So there's been much lower points in Manchester United history than this one. We're not going to go bust tomorrow. We do have £1 billion worth of debt, but hey, what's £1 billion between friends? And they will find a manager who wants to be Manchester United manager, and it'll be a good manager, we hope. Yeah. Or at least they could attract big names, right? Because you saw this summer, and Mbeumo and Cunha could have gone anywhere, really. And they decided they wanted to come to Manchester United because the cachet is still there. The history, the name, the profile, all of the things that make modern Manchester United and make managers and players want to be part of this thing and attracts fans from all over the world, Likelihood is, Wayne, that people from 200 countries will listen to this pod right now.
Yeah.
Amazingly. I don't know why. Nutters. Also, people from 200 countries will send me some abuse. So swings and roundabouts and all of that. But it's stunning, really, I think, if you think of, all of that context and the gift that Ruben was given. Yes, there are problems in the squad. Yes, it's unbalanced. Yes, it was built for 3 or 4 different managers and the strategy from the top is not always clear. But I think in time, he will personally look back and go, why did I burn all my bridges? Yeah. Could I have made different decisions that would have got me over this difficult period and given me just a bit more time? And I always wonder about that. Did they all agree together that they would just burn last season in order to teach the players that he doesn't believe in how to play the system that he gave up on this season? None of it makes any sense. And so I think he will regret what has happened deeply. And right now he's probably hurting, although apparently he was laughing and joking as he headed out of Carrington today with £7 million payoff. I suppose we could all laugh and joke about that. We're not all world famous authors. That's probably just your royalties on your last book, isn't it, Wayne?
Well,
there are, a 0 or 2 here or there. So, so there's the modern context. He's going to regret it. He could have been the man who turned it around, as the song goes, right? Yeah. And he wasn't. And it's not all his fault, but quite a lot of it is.
Yeah. So you said a lot there, and pretty much all of it I agree with. The other thing I'll say as well, that hindsight, football's great for hyper, the kind of nonsense that we criticize. I criticize a lot, but we're all privy to that, and we're all guilty of it at one point or another. One thing I don't think I gave as much credit to as you, maybe because we won a little bit and I wanted to see a little bit more green shoots, was I was probably more favourable about the Ten Hag reign. I look back, so I was thinking he's inherited something a little bit better because we've won a couple of trophies and a bit more of a foundation there. It's only with, because I think the other thing about modern football, especially people in media, football media such as ourselves, is we're scared of saying something that makes us look like a hypocrite or that we contradicted ourselves.
Yeah,
I'm happy to say quite openly that you said a few times about you were concerned about some things that were going on in the Ten Hag reign. With the benefit of 13 months hindsight, his era looks a lot worse. So the things that Amorim inherited at the time, weren't probably as rosy as what I was trying to say that they were in November of 24. What I will say, I did say this at the time when we hired him, I was concerned about putting all our eggs in the basket of a manager with a different kind of formation, a different philosophy, because I thought we could be a big problem at this point. We're not because I think the players he's brought in are really good, and I think that they'll evolve into whatever formation we play. I don't think there'll be a problem with that.
But that's not come from him. That's come from the top. I mean, you did say at the time, you said historically it's... This is kind of interesting bit of colour, isn't it? We were on this pod, you talked about the historical anachronism of the particular formation he's playing. At least modern. I know Van Gaal did at times. He abandoned that quite quickly, didn't he, after getting tanked at Leicester. And there's the interesting quote from Omar Barada, who read your book and pointed out that Sir Matt played three at the back. It's very hard to make comparisons, honestly, between football in the 50s and 60s and the patterns of how everyone played and modern football. Actually, during lockdown, me and Paul did, I can't remember how many pods now, quite a lot of pods looking at historical matches, and we tried to pick a few from different eras. And, you can really... 90s football looks a bit different from today, but not wildly different. 80s football looks like a completely different game altogether, right? It just doesn't look like modern football at all. 50s football, if anyone fancies it, it's not even the same sport. So, like, those historical comparisons between formations don't really work because the context is so different. But I think you were right to call that out with Amorim. It was right both in terms of Manchester United's history, that it didn't seem to quite fit, and I actually think some of his sort of, I don't know how you'd put it, kind of not exactly defensive tendencies, but the instinct towards safety sometimes kind of is also anachronistic. But also, it obviously didn't fit the squad he had. Yeah. And I guess that's my disappointment with him mostly, is that he didn't, we're not asking him to throw his philosophy away, and that causes problems as well, right? Ten Hag basically threw his principles out the window in order to get short-term results. I don't think Amorim did that exactly. He tinkered this season, a few more long balls. More recently, he's played four at the back occasionally, a little bit of profile changes with their out of possession and stuff like that. But I think his rigidity will not serve him well over the course of his career. He's going to have to adapt, because otherwise you just have to spend hundreds of millions of pounds, and United spent right up to the limit. I mean, basically, they had to leave some cash in the bank, otherwise couldn't pay the players. And they had got about £50 million left on the credit card, right? Yeah. So that's how far they went. If they'd bought one more player, they were at risk of not being able to pay players. And, so they gave them as much as they could, and it wasn't enough.
And more than that, not just that financially, is that the philosophical burden that was in there as well, because you're quite right. The one major problem that Amorim had was that he tied the philosophy to the formation. He's like, this is my way, this is my system, and he welded it so closely together with it that there was no room for himself to maneuver. Now, that's all right if you see progress or if you see evidence that that's the right way forward. That wasn't helped by, and I understand why they did it, so I'm not calling out the reason why they did it, where they all sort of came out and said, wait, this United had an old way of playing, and we're going to give a new way of playing. And this was Ineos's first hire. They went all in and sort of said, this is a new way of playing football. And you're quite right. I did urge a little bit of caution with the Omar Barada quote, because, you've mentioned all the points there about the fact that, I know he said, United did play historically at the three at the back, but that's when everyone did that in the 50s. Yeah. And in the book, it's nothing to do with United playing three at the back. It's to do with mirroring the systems that other teams were playing and finding solutions within that. The other point that you mentioned about football looking unfamiliar going further back is one that I often reference, is the total football of the 70s. So it's not just the game itself, it's the philosophies within the game. Yeah. So everyone now still says total football is a variation of what exists today, and it is. It goes all the way back, same as the Hungarian football, because the philosophy is about movement and interchanging positions on the pitch, they're all still true and being true to the specific formations. If you watch a game of Holland featuring Cruyff in the 1974 World Cup, you will think they are maniacs, all chasing the same ball. But the principle of what they were trying to do remains the same as what it is today. The big issue that I had at the time was to do with this dictation of this is the way that United are going to play, because they were never in control of that. And I did say that from the start. I said you are inheriting something and you're a current custodian of that. All the people who have been successful at United, even the moderately successful ones, and I'm talking about, let's say Ole, let's say Ten Hag, let's say Van Gaal, even, let's say Ron Atkinson, Tommy Docherty as well. All those sort of second-tier managers who weren't quite Ferguson or Busby, they all understood that they were inheriting something that they had to adhere their own philosophies to. The failures have come from the massive divergence away from that, such post-war. I'm talking like Mourinho, for example, even though he won 2 trophies, and most pronounced the Amorim era, because of the massive diversion they took away and the massive way that they told everyone and proclaimed this to be a distinction. You're not in a position. I say you. I'm talking the royal you. Anyone who goes into Manchester United as an owner, as a director of football, as a manager, as a coach, they are not in a position to dictate what that heritage is, and they can't change it. I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen, that someone can go in and sweep the rug from under everything and make something that's magically new, and the next 100 years become the era of that person after Ferguson and Busby. That's obviously there to be written. But the danger that they were taking was pronouncing that so wildly when they didn't have the financial clout to back it up, when we all understood that that's what was necessary. And so my concerns were always there from day one. But when you look at the win percentage, you look at the context of what you inherited, you look at the boldness to say that you're going to redesign what Manchester United is. It was dangerous from the outset. It wasn't successful. And I really does give me a big concern about what they're going to do with plan B, their plan B, because are they sticking to this? Are we going down a new Manchester United route? Or do they go back and go, look, do you know what? We probably need to respect where we are a little bit more than what we are doing.
Well, I do wonder whether the PR and the reality of the strategy and the decision making aren't quite the same thing. You know, it's one thing telling a story about, hey, bright young manager, and we were all kind of enamored by his charisma and the fact that how young he is and how relatable he is because of that. I mean, he's younger than you and I, Wayne. I think our time and our chance to become Manchester United manager might have gone, sadly. Hey, lads, I will reluctantly do it, but if you need me, I'm here for you. I wouldn't have a fucking clue what I'm doing, but I'll give it a shot anyway.
Just read my book and
exactly. I'll quote it on the training ground. Say do this, lads. Yeah. So I think we were enamored by him and the kind of marketing around him in some fashion, the story around him and
hope. There's nothing wrong with
hope. Absolutely, it's a powerful drug, right? Yeah, almost as powerful as nostalgia. And in Manchester United's case, we have a lot of that one. Yeah. Modern and historical, and so I don't know whether they'll swing from pole to pole, because actually I think some of the tension with Amorim has been that they have rightly or wrongly, a path that they believe, that they being the owners, so primarily Ratcliffe, even if he's a minority owner because he's owning football operations, Barada as his avatar, and Wilcox as the technical guy. They have a vision and a path they want to go down, and they're clearly very strongly we're going down that path. Now, there's one thing having a strategy, there's another thing executing on that strategy, and they have come into some very muddled thinking when they appointed Amorim. He may well turn out to be a very, very good coach, right? But it's always in context, isn't it? Dropped into this Manchester United squad with his particular set of philosophies and vision of how he wants to play. Right from the beginning, we were this doesn't seem to make sense. What happens with our two best players from the season before, Bruno and Ahmad? They've got no role in this team, right? We don't have the right kind of striker for this. Do we have mobile centre-backs who can pass the ball? Not really, and it was like, do we have physical midfielder to cover all the ground that one player less in midfield would make up for? Right? None of these things were true, and so I wonder if they told themselves the story while not really thinking deeply about it. And Wilcox wasn't involved in it. Apparently, this may be his spin, of course, because everyone's jockeying for the narrative, aren't they? Right now, Wilcox apparently pushed back on this and made these points. Who knows whether that's actually true? So I hope when they appoint the next guy, we're obviously going to get an interim until the summer. Sounds like it might be Michael Carrick. Who knows? Things move fast in football, don't they? But whoever they appoint next, that is the thing they need to react to, not swinging back to it has to be a 4 at the back manager because the last one was 3 at the back and that was a failure. It has to be, what have we got in terms of our talent right now? What do we think it will be next year in terms of our resources, players who need to leave, players who are going to stay, right? Long-term squad planning, that's on Wilcox. And therefore, do we have a manager who can execute on that to the maximum degree possible given the resources available, right? And you make your best assumption based on the interview process and the data that you've got in order to do that. And I think with Amorim, they got that bit quite badly wrong in retrospect. And it's easy 63 games later to go, yeah, that was obviously wrong, but that's the thing they got. And it was just going to take way too much time and way too much money. Amorim said it himself twice. I won't have the time and I don't have the money to institute my perfect 3-4-3. That conversation needed to have happened on the 1st of November 2024 or the week beforehand, right? What is it you think you're going to need, your assessment of this squad? What can we provide you? They don't match up. Probably, good luck, mate, with getting your next job, but you're probably not the right fit. And I feel like that's where they've gone badly wrong. Yeah. Now, you can even go above that and go, is Wilcox the right guy? Is he part of this bad decision-making? Was this tension always inevitable, or did he bring it on? This is his first big director of football job. Was it too much for him? I don't know the answers to that. Time will unfortunately have to tell us, when we look back in 20 years' time, we go, the Wilcox era, or historically bad director of football, our first one. So I think it's worthwhile thinking of strategy in that way, I know how hard this is. I've been, senior strategy person. It's at the time you convince yourself something is absolutely right. At one particular project I got our board to sign off on, we burnt £70 million a year until we convinced ourselves we'd failed.
Yeah.
Hey, I fucked up big too. And I was very proud of that project as well. So that's just to say, you can be as smart and intelligent and do all the assessment. Remember, they did that big, long review period, the super honest review period after Ten Hag won the FA Cup, and they met all these managers, including De Zerbi and Tuchel and Enrique and a whole bunch of others, and they decided the man they got was the best man. Right? That madness in the end, because they fired him 3 months later.
Yeah.
And I think they've done a similar thing with Amorim. And it's it's 3 strikes and you're out, guys. They can't do it for a third time. So this has to be right. And they've got a long time to get it right as well. They've got 5 months before they probably want to appoint someone permanently, or maybe 6, take it after the World Cup if they're interested in any of those managers.
Yeah.
And they otherwise we'll be talking in 2 years' time about, bloke X, who's historically the worst manager ever at Manchester United. And we don't want to do that, do we?
No, we definitely don't. And, all jokes aside, we can talk about the book and that was forecasting, 3 at the back won't work and everything like that.
Got some good sales out of this. If you check your numbers on Amazon.
But I wanted to be proved wrong because I'm a supporter of the club, and I want the evidence to be there to go all right, so if I write an updated version of it, this is where the diversion goes, and this is what proved me wrong, and these are the new philosophies and cornerstones that we've got of those philosophies, and the people who came in knew what they were doing. And I think managerial quality is a funny thing because there's never any guarantee. There isn't any greater guarantee, like you said, at the level above those people who are making those decisions. And I think that's the concern for me now, as I said earlier, is that whoever comes in is manager X. And the idea would be, the pessimist or cynic in me goes, it's Fletcher or Carrick, and they'll do better than what's expected from this point. So maybe even Champions League football, because it is a bad league. So maybe they do that. They'll get hired on a permanent basis because there's no cost to bear in that. And then we're down the same road as what we are. But wasn't the lesson, or wasn't the message that we were being told when they came in Ineos and Ratcliffe, were that things were going to be done any differently? Everything's going to be different. And to one extent, the message was different. And like I said, I've got nothing against that because it has to be. But we sacked Jose Mourinho in December, and the cynic behind you said, caretakers come in because we're in a bad financial position and we don't have any money to spend in January, so that's a good time to make a change. Solskjaer was sacked in November, and the cynic behind you went, well, we've just come out of COVID and we don't have any money to spend, so it's a good time to put a caretaker in until the end of the season because we don't have any money to spend. And then Eric Ten Hag was sacked, and the idea was, well, we don't have any money to spend because we've got all that money blown on Casemiro and Anthony, and we need someone to get through to the end of the season. And so you go, all right, well, we won't be in that position again then because that's what they've said, and we're in exactly the same position. I did forecast maybe earlier, and definitely on this podcast, where I said I thought it'd be March because I thought he'd get past January so it'd look different enough that they could maybe navigate past qualification for the Champions League no longer being possible. However, we're in exactly the same position, and what compounds the matter is the fact that they did this bold proclamation that we're going to be, this is a different kind of Manchester United. And I think if there's a lesson to be learned from all of this, I mean, if we're putting the context back on Amorim for a moment, just to look at the historical perspective of it, is let's narrow the lens to post-Ferguson. What you want is a manager who wins football matches, wins trophies, has got charisma. And too often, through all of these managers, and you might even include David Moyes in this, you'd say nice guy, but just not big enough. And the way that they talked, and you can definitely include Mourinho in this as someone who you would expect. Only Solskjaer and Van Gaal, I would say, understood the level of United as a sort of massive club that you spoke, the way that you spoke was interpreted a certain kind of way. Every other manager has failed to understand that, and the press have absolutely gobbled up every single manager. And it doesn't matter how nice he is, Amorim, the way that he put himself across to the media and how amenable he was absolutely destroyed on a week-by-week basis. But he put himself above the parapet, and he was there every single week. And in his first 2 weeks as manager, he said, I don't want to be doing this every week. And he did. He did. Doing it every single week. And the problem was, from day one, is that they said it was going to be such a pronounced different Manchester United, and they put him down. They put him out as the sole figurehead when it was a complete collective change. And this is what I'm saying about where we move from here. Are we still part of that change, or is Amorim the end of that experiment? And are you going back to say, I know what you're saying, don't just go back to four at the back and everything like that, but they don't even have to proclaim it. I'd prefer it if they didn't, if they just sort of like quietly went, do you know what we've inherited is bigger than what we expected, and we actually have to speak to a few different people and respect the history of what we've got here before making their next move. Well, they won't. I don't think they'll give us a running commentary on the process. No. I think that'll be behind the scenes, and I just hope there's some level of introspection and a recognition of the failure of the last three big decisions they've had to make: renewing Ten Hag on the emotion of the FA Cup, appointing and then firing Dan Ashworth, basically for doing his job. Which is, hey lads, I don't think this is right. He's having the two happiest people in Manchester right now are Dan Ashworth. He's not in Manchester, but he'll be having a good chuckle about this, and probably Kobbie Mainoo, who has been freed. And well, we'll see who comes in next. But so, and then Amorim, that's turned out to be a historically bad decision and appointment. And so that is pretty serious, right? Three massive appointments, and all along they've been trying to change the structural makeup of the club. Put the best in class people around, improve the data and the scouting,
get better in the recruitment market, which I think, generally speaking, they've got a slightly better record than the past 10 years, right? I'm not saying it's perfect, but a bit better. But then, the key appointment, first team manager, head coach, get that one right, Ed. Ruben didn't. They've got that bit wrong. So this one is super double important. We've said this when Amorim was appointed. It's just United are on such a there's a very thin line right now between getting back and being on the path towards some kind of improvement in the club and getting back to the kind of status where we think, back in the Champions League and competing for titles, Project 2028 and all of that. Well, and missing out on Europe and being financially in a really difficult position and probably only be able to buy players based on what we sell. And that means a big name, some favourites leaving the club, probably,
Which will be, like I said when Amorim came in, it's not just going to be the favourites, the ones that you want to go. There'll be a casualty, and it was at Cobby for a long period of time. I did want to just make a point there, because I can't disagree with anything that you said, but one thing that ought to be remembered in all this is that if you were considering that they'd taken over if Ineos had taken over from the Glazers from the football operations side, and then you were analysing their decisions, it would be catastrophic. And the reason for that being is, first of all, they flew up the flagpole, this new stadium idea, which has got it's got some green lights in local Manchester councils, but it's got no actual green shoots and it being made. So there was that, which is a pie in the sky kind of PR exercise.
So for now, it certainly is. Yeah, there's no money to do it.
But the other consequential point to that, and I'm sure this is probably worth the finance podcast that you do, is that if you just base it on the football decisions, if you take out the fact that Ratcliffe and Ineos put in a couple £100 million, United would be in dire. We'd be 1931 trouble. The time that you were talking about earlier.
They'd have sold players for sure without that money.
Yeah. And that's based purely on their footballing decisions and the hire of the managers and the sacking of the managers that they've made. So without that financial handout, which we've given us a little bit of relief, we'd be in very difficult circumstances. And I'm not saying that to pat Ratcliffe and Ineos on the back. Absolutely, there. What I'm saying is actually that's quite the other thing. And one last thing I want to say before I close my point on this, if you can close the pod soon, Ed, is that I think every managerial reign since Sir Alex, people have had their favourites who wanted to come in. There's a big proportion of fans now, probably part of them, who thought Mourinho should have succeeded Ferguson in the first place. That would have been the strongest move. I was ever convinced that he'd be a long-term manager, just for the short-term bounce of what was needed. And ever since then, there's been a divide of people want to be manager, and it's created a massive. It's coincided with the social media boom, and there's been this toxic brigade, and everything's in there. And every single managerial change has brought with it this higher toxic divide, and people sniping at each other. It's been horrible, particularly with the Ollie one. The Ollie one was really bad, and then even Ten Hag, it was like, oh, you're Ten Hag in, you're an idiot. And a lot of us just wanted to support the manager because we wanted the club to survive. And I think I'm removed from the fact that I think that that's still happening now. I think I'm just numb to the fact that, because I wasn't ever staunchly hammering in. I was always back the manager, back the club and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's been such a massive time of turmoil. He didn't have that kind of sniping the way that we've done it before. And I think there's this massive collective, for the first time, as far as I can see, this massive collective sadness and resignation of the idea was under Ineos that we were going to be definitely on the right path, and that Project 2028 was just an inevitability because they would support it. But this idea now that we've seen that they're fallible and they can make the wrong results, and the wrong results can make the wrong decisions, and those can lead to the decisions and results that have us where we are, and we're further away or as far away as we've ever been.
Yeah,
things are a big collective. And I just wanted to say, everyone's going to be feeling that now. So let's not. This match going support won't turn on each other, I don't think. But the time for unity now, I don't think that there's any nobody has their own favourites. Let's be honest, there's no obvious candidate that jumps out there and say, you've got to hire this man. So there shouldn't be any obvious division. Do you know what I mean? This is terrible. These are. We were talking in May after the Europa League defeat about how catastrophic that defeat was. And this is how catastrophic it is.
Yeah. So you can draw a line between the two things for sure, right? Because if we'd won that final on a single goal, right, on razor thin margins, if we'd just taken a chance or been a bit more proactive, Amorim would have had his 2 or 3 extra players, and things may have looked different, or maybe not. Who knows? Yeah. Well, Jack Robson and Herb Bamlett, they're looking down on us going, maybe I'm not the worst, lads, or something like that. Yeah, we'll have a lot more analysis on the pod, and Wayne will be doing both his Substack and his podcast. Are you doing more Paul Parker this week?
I did one today.
That was very good on today.
I will be doing something on Substack to summarise my thoughts on.
I shall try and do it as well. The funny thing is, I was writing a piece last night as I was going to bed and suspecting that he'd be fired in the morning. That obviously I'm a few hours difference to Manchester, suspecting I'd wake up in the middle of the night with an awful lot of WhatsApps, and I tried to put a longish post on Substack and not Substack, Twitter, like putting some context to my thoughts, and of course, it being the social media age, they're like, how dare you back the board? How dare you back the manager?
Yeah,
I was like, somehow I managed to make the argument in people's minds of both poles on this. Everything's a culture war these days, isn't it?
Exactly,
It is. So, hopefully, we've given some kind of sober thoughts to the context in which Amorim has failed and maybe succeeded and win the trophy as the worst post-war Manchester United manager. No one wanted this, right? I'm taking no joy in this at all. I think you could frame my personal view of Amorim. I had a long time when I was like, I like the guy, but there's no evidence. And then I think I slowly became a skeptic. I'd probably frame myself like that rather than a strongly Amorim in or Amorim out. And after all, like, we're just commentators, we're fans. We just happen to have a mic and a piece of software, and we can publish it. We have no say in this, and it doesn't really matter what we think or say at all. All right. Other than you, Wayne, because you write big, important books that the CEO of Manchester United references.
Blame me, guys. Blame me.
Someone somewhere most certainly will do. All right, we'll leave it there. I think I'm back with Daniel tomorrow we'll have a reflection on what has come out, because I suspect we'll be getting the 4,000 words inside the sacking of Manchester of Ruben Amorim pieces very shortly, and we'll look forward to Darren Fletcher's debut as Manchester United's interim manager away to Burnley on Wednesday night. I'm just looking forward to the vibes when he plays 3 at the back and both of his sons. Chef's kiss, perfect. Please do it, Please do it, Darren. It would be great. He's a man who fully understands Manchester United, though, right? I don't expect him to become the permanent manager, but for someone who understands the modern club, you couldn't get someone who's more knowledgeable about the club and football generally. I think he's deeply respected, Darren. So I wish him all the success in his 1 or 2 games, or maybe more. We'll see. Listeners, viewers, thank you very much, Wayne. As always, thanks a lot.
Thank you.